Block Party DFS show with 1 week seasons. Jmtowin. We're running through this week 10 DFS slate from a DraftKings perspective. We're going to do a slate overview. Then we'll go position by position with Jam's favorite plays for tournaments this week. And then we'll wrap up with a tournament build on DraftKings using some of JM's favorite building blocks. I'm Pete Overzet. This is the Block Party. Let's roll.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crash 5 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everyone. Indeed, Jmtowin. How are we doing here on this week 10 DFS slate?
Doing all right, man. I told you before we came on air, I got about 3 hours of sleep last night. So we're cruising. We're cruising on whatever reserves I've got in here. But I did hear you use the word favorite multiple times in your intro to the show. I don't know that there's anything favorite of mine on this slate. I mean, this is a uniquely ugly slate beyond what I think people necessarily even realize. And I think that realizing that is probably critical to our edge on this slate. We'll talk about that some more as we go through. But yeah, I don't think that this week I have any favorite plays or favorite stacks or favorite building blocks. But I think that rather than the tendency is then to try to force something to be a favorite. Rather than doing that, for me, I want to recognize that I don't have favorites. And then that basically directs my approach on the week of what I think is going to be required to win tournaments or what I think maximizes our opportunities to win tournaments this week.
Yeah, we're going to dig into all of it, and I'll reframe it and say the plays JM likes slightly more than he hates, or something along those lines. You know,
yeah, or maybe even the plays that I hate slightly more than others, but not to the extent that everybody else will hate them. I mean, honestly, I think that's kind of what this week's going to be like. Is like the popular plays this week, by and large, shouldn't be popular plays on a given slate. They're actually the best plays on this particular slate. Like I did all my research and I was like, man, I've got to be missing something. Finished up my DFS interpretations. And then I looked at ownership and I was like, man, everybody I've isolated as like kind of the sharpest plays per game are the highest owned plays on the slate. And yet none of them inspire that much confidence. So I feel like this is a unique week in which saying, oh, the play that's just like a little bit less good with dramatically lower ownership. Well, the best plays on this slate on a typical slate wouldn't be the best plays. And so basically looking for other plays that project similarly is a good way to go this week, or maybe don't even project similarly, but are in that same range and can outscore those popular plays, because the popular plays are, it's not bad chalk. It's just like overestimated chalk in terms of the way people are going to be playing this week. The chalky plays look like the best plays on the slate, but they're not the best plays on the typical slate. So yeah, just an interesting week from a strategy angle. By the way, I replaced a kind of a chair in my office that had some cushion on it with like a new chair, and I've got more echo in my office now. So I don't know if you can catch that here, but yeah,
I think you sound normal to me. You sound
the
good.
Acoustics are just a little bit different than normal.
Well, we'll dig into some of the slate specifics here in a second. I always like to do a quick recap as I try to jog my brain about week 10. It was we had a big Burrow and Chase Brown week. That was 2 games ago for the Bengals. We had, what else? We had the Geno JSN stuff hitting. We had all the running back smash again, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara. How did your week 9 go?
Man, I got completely wiped out in week 9. It was a bad week, and it was, I think, a semi-bad week of play, somewhere between finishing my content on Friday. So, last week I traveled back from New England. So that's a 12-hour travel day with a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and then changing time zones, Halloween thrown in there, then the daylight savings. Like, it was just a weird week, right? And somewhere between finishing my content on Friday and actually building my rosters on Saturday, I kind of lost confidence in what I was seeing. And I started just like pulling pieces from what I was hearing from lots of different people. So it was an interesting week where I had like a really good core of players, but I just sort of spread things out too thin and didn't get like all those 30-point scores onto a roster together. So yeah, turn the page. It was sort of a bury the football week for me, where don't worry too much about it and just say bad week of play and good week of process, bad week of play, and turn the page.
Yeah, I had one of those kind of weeks where on DraftKings where I had like the right pieces, like the core in one lineup, but the wrong stack around it, and then the right stack on the other lineup, but the wrong, core around it. So didn't get home in DraftKings, but we are going to get you guys ready to go for this week 10 slate here. And, the thing that jumped to my mind as you were kind of describing the slate, and this is a dynamic that happens a decent amount where these slates where there aren't as many good plays, chalk is going to condense no matter what. Like
Right.
Chalk is forming whether it's an awesome slate or whether it's a bad slate. And I feel like for the more contrarian players, weeks like this end up being really, advantageous because you can get off of the plays that everyone likes that aren't as good plays in a normal week. So does that track for you that this week sets up as kind of a contrarian players week?
Yeah, well, and so there's a quote from Peter Thiel where I'll paraphrase it, but the gist of it was the best way to be contrarian is to think for yourself. And that's typically my pathway to being contrarian is I do my research. And especially this season, there's been a lot of weeks where I've come out of my bubble of research and preparation. I've looked at ownership projections and started talking out loud to my computer screen. Like sometimes my kids are with me and they're like, who are you talking to? And I'm looking at the computer screen and saying, what are you guys thinking? Why is this chalk, right? And I love those weeks in terms of being contrarian because you're literally just going to your favorite plays, the plays that you feel are sharpest, and then looking at the field's ownership and recognizing, man, the field is just embracing certainty, cash game type plays without a lot of ceiling. There's no reason these plays should be chalk in tournaments, and they are, right? And then you can be contrarian just by playing your favorite plays. This is more a week where it becomes one of those weeks where late week ownership projections become important to me because, again, like the most popular plays are plays that I isolated as, okay, these are the best plays on this slate. So at least from my research, that's what I was seeing, but none of them inspire extreme confidence. So like right now, Aaron Jones projecting for over 30% ownership. Well, I isolated him as like, Aaron Jones, could be one of the guys I kind of key in on this week, but that's how I feel about him is, he's could be one of the guys I key in on, right? He has one game north of like 20 DraftKings points. He's got this huge red zone role, but it hasn't translated to touchdowns quite yet. So there's still opportunity there. But yeah, there's just kind of a lot of this where you could really, on a week like this, say, how big of a gap is there between this guy who's projected at 3% owned and this guy who's projected at 20% owned in terms of projections? And in a lot of those spots, you'll see that the gap isn't that big, that maybe the guy who's 20% owned is projected to outscore the guy who's 3% owned 55 times out of 100. So the expected value is so much higher and just going with some of those lower owned plays. So yeah, this is a week where being contrarian just by thinking for yourself, or at least for me, isn't necessarily the way to go because the way I'm thinking for myself is in line with what the field is seeing. But I can zoom out and be like, yeah, but what the field is seeing, they're expressing way too much confidence in those. And so this is a week where I'll kind of go out of my way to be contrarian by saying, okay, where can I build a stack that people aren't on? Where can I, we'll get to the quarterbacks in a moment. A lot of the popular quarterbacks this week probably aren't going to hit 4x their salary. Like they're popular, Sam Darnold, Justin Herbert, like some of these guys are popular because they're going to put up a solid score. But if somebody puts up a huge score, you jump over the field, right? So kind of embracing that risk, embracing that variance and saying, who could outscore the field? Who could be the unique way to go this week? And I think that's kind of the way to build is kind of scope out those lower ranges of ownership projections late in the week and say, who are a couple players or a stack that I can pull from here just to do things differently than the field?
Let's go ahead and take a look at the slate kind of from an overview as far as what games we have available. Obviously, this Giants-Panthers game is overseas, not part of the main slate. We have a couple teams with monster team totals. You mentioned the Aaron Jones stuff. The Vikings in a really good spot against a depleted Jags team, 25-point team total. The Niners, a monster team total, 28.5, should be getting CMC back this week. Chiefs not too bad at 24.75, Bills 25.5. And then you got some games that project to be a little tighter. Falcons Saints could be a good one there. Jets and Cardinals have a tight spread. What's kind of jumping out to you from a game level perspective?
Well, it calls back for me something we've explored quite a bit this year, but that's basically looking at high-end wide receiver scores and highlighting and recognizing that almost all the time, high-end wide receiver scores come from heavy volume games or from high scoring games. So it's easy to look through game logs of Jamar Chase and see, I don't even know what he put up last night, 50 plus DraftKings points, right? Yeah. To go through his game logs and be like, oh, he's got these couple 30 pointers. He's got a 50 pointer. I should play him in this spot where nobody's on him. But you look at last night, it was 17 targets. It was a back and forth game. It was a 34-35 game. Neither defense could stop either offense. That tends to be where we see these high scores emerge from, right? And so a team like the Vikings. We still haven't seen Justin Jefferson put up more than, I don't know what it is, 23, 24 DraftKings points. He costs 8,800. I mean, that's a huge price tag to pay for a guy who's not typically cracking 25 points. It's not because he can't. It's because the Vikings are controlling games. They're trying to hold Sam Darnold to kind of 30-ish or fewer pass attempts. So in this game against the Jags, where Mac Jones is starting under center and they're missing Christian Kirk, like potentially missing Gabe Davis, like, is this a spot where we get a tournament winner from this Vikings passing attack? And I'm kind of seeing that in a lot of different spots. We can touch on some more specifics, but that's it. That specific spot right there is emblematic of what I'm seeing. And so, yeah, it's kind of like these spots where I don't really see the opportunity for the passing volume to pile up in such a way that we can feel really confident in our chances of getting a tournament winner from those spots. So I'm not seeing any game environments that stand out as potential back and forth shootouts. We have to recognize there's not always going to be a game like last night's Bengals-Ravens game, and this is not a slate where I see a high probability of that happening. So there are some spots where it's like, oh, you can squint and see how this game becomes competitive, and this offense has to stay aggressive. Bills and Colts, for example, like Shane Steichen is typically able to figure out a way to keep games close, typically able to figure out a way to score points. That game is in Indianapolis, so that helps the Colts keep that game close. So then the question just becomes, how do the Bills attack? Is it Josh Allen? Is it James Cook? Does either guy produce the type of score you would really want at their price tags? But yeah, kind of in general, I'm not seeing any games that I'm going out of my way to stack. And I think that the broader spreads on these high total teams should remind us that the chances of us piling up passing volume are not necessarily that high.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of been a theme for this year too, with the combination of wide receiver injuries, passing volume being down, the running back smashing, and then you go and you look through the player pool, and it's hard to find wide receiver plays you like. I've been feeling it this week on Underdog, even how quickly the wide receiver talent dries up. I did want to give a shout out, Steven mentioning, early on, you had that Herbert call. And the past 3 weeks, finally, above expectation for dropbacks, actually letting Herbert cook over 300 yards a couple of these games. How you feeling about this new look Chargers?
Yeah, so they had those two games where they had to, by the way, I had, like I said, a horrible week. One thing I was proud of last week was Quentin Johnston was my 6th highest exposure wide receiver in terms of dollars invested into a player. Wow. Great spot for him against the Browns, aggressive Browns defense, those downfield throws to somebody like Quentin Johnston, good leverage off of Vlad McConkey. So yeah, there's this passing attack is something I've started looking toward again. They had those two games where they were kind of forced to air it out because it was a competitive, close game. And since then, we've had 2 games that the Chargers controlled, and we've seen Herbert throw the ball. I think it's 27 and 32 times, something like that in these 2 games. So they're certainly becoming more willing to let him throw the ball. But also 27 to 32 is probably what we see in this game, right? Because how likely is it that the Titans against this really good Chargers defense are able to turn this into a back and forth competitive game? So yeah, I see Herbert kind of like Darnold. Like both these guys have really high floors this week. It's hard for me to see the pathways, the non-fluky pathways to one of them putting up 26, 27 DraftKings points. But I think each guy can get 18 to 22. And there's potential, especially at Herbert's price tag, there's potential that that's enough on this week, right? So we also want to think about in tournaments, like who could be the guy who could score 30, like I talked about with Stafford last week, who didn't, end up getting there, but kind of laid out those numbers of Stafford with all 3 of those weapons. And it's like, he's probably going to score around 22, 23, 24 points. So if that's pretty high probability, you want to be looking at the guys who can score 30 or the cheap guys who could score in that same range. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I'm seeing that spot.
Yeah. And like you said, last week there were a few different avenues to winning tournaments, right? Where it's like, obviously, if you had the Burrow score paired up with Gesicki, you were doing well, but you could have won tournaments, and people did, with Geno being in that range that you described, that 18 to 22, but you have JSN stacked with him who goes nuclear, and then the Geno score is enough to win. So yeah, different ways to kind of think about those plays. Let's get into quarterback. Though I do think there are some interesting options this week. We've mentioned some of the pocket passers who have low tags, the Herbert, the Darnold, the Purdy's, and then we got the guys on the high end as well, the Jalen Hurts, the Josh Allen, and the Jaden Daniels. Where are you kind of gravitating at quarterback this week?
So yeah, typically in the player grid, this, others some of you who are watching this read the player grid every week, and I break things down by tiers. So I've got my blue chips, I've got my build arounders, my stacks. I've got the building blocks, which we get to one of those deeper into the show. And then I have my bonus plays, which is like usually running backs, wide receivers, because you're not putting quarterbacks in the bonus plays because those belong in the build arounds, right? The stacks, the building around this game environment. This is an interesting week where 4 of my 6 quarterbacks that the research is pointing me toward, 4 of my 6 quarterbacks are just down in the bonus section. In other words, I'm not really that interested in building around the game environment. I'm not necessarily even that interested in the potential for the team to take off, but it's like, well, given what this slate looks like, that's kind of how my pool is shaping up. So yeah, we touched on Darnold and Herbert, but those are kind of the guys at the bottom. And I have them categorized as high floor quarterbacks. Like the chance of them hitting for a ceiling game are pretty low, but they should have a good shot at hitting that kind of 18 to 22, 23 point range. And then we have at the top, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are, Jaden Daniels is what he is in terms of, literally nobody on this Washington offense has gone for 4X their week 10 salary at all this season as far as like guys who are seeing the field right now. So that includes Jaden Daniels, but for me, it's Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. And they're both in this category of high ceiling with low floors. I mean, Jalen Hurts is, since they came out of the bye, we can pull up his pass attempts on here, but it's like 14 and 20 and 25. Like he hasn't topped 25 pass attempts since they came out of the bye. And so 24, 20, 14, and 25, right? They're playing Dallas, who Dallas ranks 25th in offensive DVO. We talked about this last week where it was like the name value on Dallas is going to lead people to this passing attack in this spot. But I was like, this is the last chance I'm giving Dallas. Like if they bomb against Atlanta, that's it for me, right? And that was with Dak. Now Dak's out. You've got Cooper Rush on an offense that's ranked 25th in offensive DVOA with a guy in Dak Prescott who really should have won the MVP last year, given the way that he played, right? I mean, he was statistically the MVP last year. So like we're talking a good quarterback. He's now out. It's Cooper Rush. The Eagles defense has been playing really well. So the chances of Jalen Hurts throwing it 33, 35 times, I think are really low in this spot. I think we see another 25 or fewer attempt game. So with him, you're basically betting on the rushing touchdowns or just the touchdowns overall. So can he get there? He's done it back-to-back weeks. So I think that Jalen Hurts, like the ceiling is high, but the floor is low. And then Josh Allen, if Josh Allen has to in any way take over this game against Indianapolis, he's the kind of guy who can put up 35 to 40. The problem is that's not really how they're calling this offense these days. So yeah, these two guys both really high ceilings, have the potential to blow away the slate. But then, the likeliest outcome for both of them is they're scoring kind of 20, 22, 24 points in the same range as Herbert and Sam Darnold. So then the question becomes like, who can outscore those guys? And so there's the Tampa San Francisco game, which we'll touch on in a moment. And then there's just the question that we should all be asking of like, okay, and who's kind of off the board that doesn't project as well, but you can draw up the scenario of this game environment going such a way that they could be the quarterback that you had to have. And I think that could be what ends up winning tournaments. Because if Allen, Hurts, Darnold, Herbert all score kind of in this 18 to 24 point range, the one quarterback who scores 30, 32, like that blows away everything. So I think that we need to be thinking about that of like, okay, the research doesn't point to these guys, but we can paint the picture of them blowing up.
Yeah. And I guess we had a little bit of news, no Keon Coleman this week. And it sounds like for a while there. So, freeing up, maybe some targets there for Amari, Kincaid, and Khalil Shakur. Let's stay at quarterback though. Which of you mentioned not having a ton of interest in necessarily like stacking a ton. Are there any of these quarterbacks as far as kind of like double stacks that jump out to you as far as these pocket passers that aren't going to get a lot of rushing production?
No. Yeah, it's like a weird week, right? Because the reason we stack, and we've explored this too throughout the season, the reason we stack is because volume is where we really get these points piling up. When these quarterbacks have the big games, I'm thinking about the Kirk Cousins game where, 3 of his pass catchers got there. It's typically because the quarterback's throwing a lot more than normal. So in PPR scoring, there's a lot of additional volume. So we talked about this last week with Dak and CeeDee Lamb. Like typically when CeeDee Lamb is seeing his 17 target games, also Jake Ferguson or Jalen Tolbert or in the last year, Brandon Cooks, like they're seeing 3 or 4 more targets than normal, right? So you have an opportunity for multiple guys to hit. That's why you double stack in spots. And so if I don't see the volume piling up, I don't want to go out of my way to force a double stack, because then you're just sort of hoping to get a 4 touchdown game from the quarterback and get the touchdowns right on the players you're taking. So this is a week where, unless I'm telling a specific story of a shootout developing and volume piling up, I'm not necessarily going that direction this week.
Makes sense. Let me ask you about the Niners specifically. Obviously Purdy in a very good spot, monster team total. This Bucs team just got shredded by Mahomes. They're getting CMC back. Debo splits without Ayuk have been awesome. George Kittle has been the best, tight end in football this year. What is your thoughts on attacking this Niners team? Like, can you get away with not having a Niner in a lineup this week?
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's always this surface level component. You look at a slate, and even if you're sharp, even if you've got a sense of all the teams and players, right? You look at the slate and there's the thing that stands out first. And sometimes you dig a little deeper and that thing that stood out first is what still stands out. Sometimes you dig a little deeper and you're like, ooh, there's something here that people aren't seeing. So for me, the week started as like, well, Purdy's the most obvious play on the slate. And I think that that's where a lot of people are going to stop. Now, will it surprise me if Purdy puts up 26, 27 DraftKings points and ends up providing really good value? It won't surprise me at all. But I also want to point out something. And that is that the Bucs, they're actually like an average pass defense. They're not a bad pass defense. They just face so many pass attempts that they're giving up tons of yards, tons of receptions, tons of touchdowns. And so when you look at like the per pass metrics, Tampa, I mean, they're not good, but they're not god awful, right? Whereas the stats make us think, man, Tampa is god awful against the pass. It's just that they're facing high passing volume. So we can go back through. Purdy has 16 regular season wins since the start of last year. He's topped 30 pass attempts once in those 16 regular season wins. That's just how the 49ers call their games. And they're getting Christian McCaffrey back. So what are the chances that Purdy is throwing the ball dramatically more than normal, which is why most quarterbacks are performing so much better than normal against Tampa? So to me, I'm looking at this as probably we see Purdy's, especially with Tampa's missing Mike Evans, missing Chris Godwin. What are the chances that they push this scoring pace to another? They're aggressive. They keep figuring things out. But like, what are the chances that they're keeping this so close and so back and forth that the 49ers are like, man, we got to have Purdy throw it 37 times. And so I see this as a spot where the field is going to look at it and be like, man, this is such a smash spot. And realistically, it's like, I mean, Purdy has lots of really good games in middling matchups. But if we assume he's going to throw it 26 to 30 times, that's what this is. It's kind of like a middling matchup. And so I see Purdy as one of these guys who is one of the sharper plays on the slate in a vacuum, but the field is going to dramatically overstate his chances of posting a blow-up game because they most of them will not go that second layer deeper and recognize that this matchup doesn't set up for the 49ers the way it does for other teams. And then you got Christian McCaffrey. Like, if he sees his normal workload, yeah, you want Christian McCaffrey. What if he doesn't, right? And then it's like you're paying over $8K for a guy who's seeing a middling workload. And then George Kittle has had this huge role this year. Well, Jordan Mason doesn't catch passes. Garendo doesn't catch passes. And so why is George Kittle being used so much more in the pass game? Well, probably because Christian McCaffrey hasn't been in there all season. So there's a lot of moving parts here where maybe McCaffrey sees enough work that Kittle's not having his blow-up game. Maybe the 49ers are throwing their normal amount against Tampa. And so, they're putting up good scores, but nobody's smashing. And so, yeah, I initially was looking at this spot as like, man, just start with the 49ers. You don't like anything on the slate, start with the 49ers, just build from there. And now it's like, man, this 49ers, it has potential for this to be one of our edges of just avoiding the 49ers. And so I definitely think you can't like play at the slate 100 times. There's certainly a lot of times where tournament winners are going to come without 49ers pieces. There are also clearly times where tournament winners are going to come from 49ers pieces. So I think that's kind of the way to look at this is like just the strategy angle. The pathway to first place might actually be going differently than the 49ers and just recognizing the reasons why the 49ers could underwell.
I do know one quarterback play you're kind of interested in that is off the board. We're going to save that for our building blocks. Let me toss two more names at you. I know we're struggling to find stuff we like this week. These would be a couple a little bit more off the board. Aaron Rodgers going against a pretty bad Cardinals team. And then Mac Jones potentially in a negative game script against a Viking secondary that's given up some big games to opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah, so Aaron Rodgers, we'd have to go back really far to get, his last tourney winner. I mean, it's been however long since he's thrown for over 300 yards. And, Devontae Adams, his average depth of target is 8.5 yards since he joined the Jets. That's kind of how they use him, right? Before that, actually, Garrett Wilson's average depth of target has jumped to like 12 point something. And before Devontae Adams was there, it was around 9. So it's like Aaron Rodgers loves this. They don't do motion. They don't do a lot of creative stuff with their route concepts. Like Aaron Rodgers still wants to do his 2010s offensive, like I'm going to come up to the line, read it, and figure out who's going to be open and pick up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 yards on every play. And so, yeah, it's hard for Aaron Rodgers to put up a tournament winner, but in terms of just touchdown variance breaking his way, it can happen. I think that Mac Jones is really interesting because, again, what I want to be thinking about is who are the players, regardless of price, that can go for 30, 32, 35, because I just don't think we're going to see many quarterbacks, if any quarterbacks, do that this week. So if one guy does that and you have him, that's massive separator potential. Or who are the cheap guys that just change your salary allocation, your roster construction, and allow you to do something different? So Mac Jones obviously got kind of broken by all the offensive coordinator changes, Matt Patricia and Joe Judge being his offensive coordinator one year in New England, Bill Belichick not really liking Mac Jones. But remember his rookie year, he was rookie of the year. He went to the Pro Bowl. Like, he was a solid NFL quarterback. So he certainly has tools. And I could see, Doug Peterson, kind of a quarterback whisperer. I could see Mac Jones playing well here. The one thing that kind of hurts is like, who does he throw the ball to in this spot? And then obviously this confusing Minnesota defense. So I think the floor is really low, but I certainly think it wouldn't surprise me if Mac Jones comes out and puts up 21, 22 DraftKings points, matches the guys who cost more than him, and just sort of changes your salary allocation and gives you a really different roster than other people are going to have.
Any other quarterbacks you want to mention before we move on here?
No, and to be clear, the kind of the 6 guys I highlighted are I think that they're all going to be popular. They're all sharp on paper plays. They're probably the sharpest on paper plays. It's just that this week might actually lend itself to going off the board at quarterback because, again, these guys would not be chalk in like other weeks where there's more to really like.
Shout out to the chat hanging out with us today. If you guys do listen to this in audio form, we do stream this live every Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern. We got my guy Sammy here, has been a YouTube member for 22 months. And with the super chat, says, appreciate all the help. I'm getting better at this shit. Love to hear it. Sammy, we also got Mathology here gifting a membership, and Sammy gifting a membership. That is very nice of you guys. Thank you very much. As always, the memberships come with a few different perks. You get 2 extra premium shows a week, depending on what tier you are at. For the if you're the Hand Builders and OptoBro tier, that top one, you get 2 premium shows a week. Saturday, After Dark shows, interview series with various people from around the space. We build some teams, chop it up. And then Sunday mornings, we have the Cram, which is an overview of the slate, overnight news, top plays. We run some sims, build some lineups, all of that good stuff. And also get you access to a private Discord channel in the Deposit Kingdom Discord as well. All right, Jam. Let's move on over to running back. Definitely have some high-end plays that look good once again, but it also, like quarterback, like all these positions this week, gets thin pretty quickly. So what's your kind of high-level overview here at running back?
Yeah, so let's start with our cover boy, Saquon Barkley. Yeah. This is the rare week where you asked on Thursday for the cover boy. Usually you ask on Wednesday. So usually by Friday, I've forgotten who the cover boy is until you say it. But this week, fresh in my mind. Saquon Barkley not currently expected to draw as much ownership as some of these other running backs. So here's an interesting just perspective, right? He's playing one of the 2 worst run defenses in football. If you just looked at the flex position, wide receiver, running back, tight end, all the players available on this slate, there have been 6 total scores from all the players available on the slate. 6 total scores this year of 36 plus DraftKings points. 3 of them have come from Saquon Barkley, and he's playing one of the 2 worst run defenses in football. So to me, in terms of where could we find separator scores, Saquon Barkley is the guy who stands out the most. He's the only guy I have listed as a light blue chip or blue chip play this week in the player grid. And so we know that his range of outcomes is broad because you see the target counts 4, 1, 3, 2, 4. We're really betting on talent here, which I'm such a volume guy that typically that's not my way to attack slates. But at the same time, like, I'm okay losing because Saquon puts up 7 or 12 points if I'm giving myself that pathway to Saquon putting up 36 and potentially nobody else doing that. So yeah, Saquon is kind of the guy up at the top. And then there's strong plays this week, but all of them come with question marks. So Christian McCaffrey, we have the question marks around his workload. Bijan Robinson, he's basically never going to see more than 20 touches. So you're really betting on just on talent there. Obviously a good matchup for him. Alvin Kamara. So, he had, 35 touches last week, but Jamal Williams was out. And before that, he was, seeing 17, 14, whatever it was, touches per game. So like, I don't know that Alvin Kamara just comes out and sees 30 plus touches again. It wouldn't surprise me if he goes back under 20 touches again this week. And then Breece Hall. So Breece Hall had a weird spot a couple weeks ago where back-to-back games with Todd Downing calling plays, Breece Hall playing over 80% of the snaps, and all of a sudden Breece Hall chalk, Braylon Allen comes in and gets a bunch of touches. But a couple things there. Last week, Breece Hall bumped back up to 77%. And the week before that game, Jets and Patriots game, the Jags had played the Patriots. And Tank Bigsby, who's similar size, similar style to Braylon Allen, had completely gashed that Patriots run defense. And heading into that week where, we all kept talking about Breece Hall, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, what if they use Braylon Allen more in this game because of that, right? And so we got to understand that NFL teams are watching film. They're trying to figure out what's their best way to win this game. So I think Breece Hall's snaps stay where they've been in 3 of the last 4 games. The problem is he's still at 18 or fewer touches in 3 of these 4 games. So again, touch concerns on him. So we've got 4 guys here who the ceiling is there, especially on Christian McCaffrey, especially on Alvin Kamara if he has one of these heavy touch games. But the chances are also there that they see, 15 touches, 17 touches, 18 touches, and kind of underwhelmed for the salary you're paying for them. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm seeing the top of the running back position.
Yeah. What about Bijan? I guess he was the one maybe didn't get quite the shine there. He's been playing well. What do you think about this matchup? 4 straight games over 20 DraftKings points? Yeah.
So his biggest Hilo and Lord Reeves actually highlighted this last week, but Bijan's biggest production games typically come in competitive games because he's the guy who sees the pass catching work. And so when they trail or when they are in competitive game environments is actually when he ends up seeing his most carries, his most touches. And so in a game against this Saints team that doesn't have Chris Olave, doesn't have Rashid Shaheed, unless they get that interim coach bounce, I have a hard time seeing this being a game where they're leaning on Bijan Robinson as the focal point, the centerpiece throughout, right? This could be a game where Tyler Algier gets 12 or 13 carries. And so again, I have touch concerns on him. And, we're still waiting for this 30-point game from him. We're typically getting 23, 21, 25, right? We see that one game of 26 DraftKings points. And it's like, okay, like he can hit this, but 26 at 7,700, that's his best game of the year. So and that's the thing with this slate, right? Like all these players have some issues that you can take with them. And so, yeah, Bijan just kind of falls into the same bucket. He doesn't really separate from these other guys, but he's certainly capable of putting up 23, 25. And there's potential that that's what you need regardless of price tag on this particular week.
I want to ask you about 2 guys that we've talked about in previous weeks, really elite roles, but don't necessarily get the shine as some of these other guys. That would be DeAndre Swift on the Bears and James Conner on the Cardinals, who, James Conner was so close to a massive day last week, fell on his head at the goal line, got subbed out. That should have been an easy 6 there, but I digress. Thoughts on James Conner and DeAndre Swift?
Yeah, I think both guys are, James Conner doesn't have a great matchup. And we've looked at it since Kyler came back. Like he's so consistently scoring 17 plus DraftKings points. And he had a couple games last year. We got up into like the 28, 29 point range. And so he has that within his range of outcomes because he's not going to have any explosive breakaway runs. You are kind of just betting on him consistently picking up yards. That's what he does, right? But consistently picking up yards, catching passes, picking up points. So he feels like a safe play with very slim paths to a ceiling game, but he certainly has paths to a ceiling game. And then this matchup that the Bears have against the Patriots run defense is tremendous. DeAndre Swift, I think just a sharp play, and not much more to say about. He's not like a light blue chip for me, but he's a high bonus play for me for sure.
Gotcha. As far as like really good, cheap value on this slate, I am not seeing a ton of stuff under 6K. Have you found anything down there to like?
No. For me, it's kind of this 6K range for the cheaper guys. And I don't think that's a bad thing, right? That's kind of what DraftKings has provided us with this year. And we have to work with that. And then wide receiver feels pretty thin. So it feels like that's not a bad place. And tight end, we've talked about this recently, but most of these tight ends are being priced lower than they should be compared to where wide receivers are priced and what wide receivers are producing. So getting 1 or 2 cheap tight ends or wide receivers, you can certainly create the salary to, be paying 6K for a couple of running backs and 8K for a running back or however you want to handle these positions. Yeah.
Any other running backs that you have interest in? I'll just quickly sprinkle a few other names we haven't had a chance to touch on. Jonathan Taylor, Tony Pollard, your James Cook, Ramondre Stevenson's, in anything else. Again, I know one of them we'll get to in the building block section, but any other names to shout out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron Jones has ceiling, right? He's going to be over-owned, it seems, but he has ceiling. Ramondre Stevenson, every high-low highlighted this last week, but every game that the Patriots have played close, all 5 games the Patriots have played close, Ramondre's had a really strong game. It's like 17 to 24 DraftKings points in all 4 or 5 of those games. So I think they can keep this game close, and if they do, then Ramondre certainly has potential against this Bears run defense. Just lost Andrew Billings in the middle, and so yeah, I mean, this is a good spot for Ramondre Stevenson. James Cook is one of these guys who people don't want to play him because the range of outcomes is so broad, but he has it within his range of outcomes to be the guy who puts up 30 plus points on a week where maybe nobody else does that. So I think that he very much should be considered based on strategy on this particular week. And then Jonathan Taylor. So Jonathan Taylor's gone 3 years without cracking 31 DraftKings points. I mean, that's a lot to pay for a guy with that profile. At the same time, the Bills run defense also, there's this misperception because you look and see, oh man, the Bills have given up so many fantasy points to running backs. Well, that's because Derrick Henry crushed them. And then they give a bunch of receiving yards to running backs. They're actually a really good run defense outside of what Derrick Henry did to them and outside of backs catching the ball. But I will note that part of the reason a guy like Derrick Henry was able to smash them is because they have really undersized linebackers, and they've always sort of built that way. And Jonathan Taylor, another guy who, that size that he brings to the table, right? The last time that Jonathan Taylor topped 31 DraftKings points was that 56-pointer against the Bills 3 years ago. So, different personnel now, but same sort of building strategy that the Bills have on defense. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that Jonathan Taylor is certainly in the mix on a week like this where I'm more willing than normal to go outside of like what I can predict based off of the research and more toward like, yeah, but what can I see? What can I draw up that says, yeah, the ceiling could emerge on these guys. So Jonathan Taylor falls into that bucket. James Cook falls into that bucket where they're not predictable, but they have potential to be kind of a piece that you really needed on this week.
Yep. Let's go ahead and move on to running backs. Like I said, I'll keep teasing you guys. We got a kind of an off the board building block for you guys today.
Which people love, don't they? They love to complain when we get to the off the board one. So you guys will be excited about that. Any of you who like to complain about the vomit stacks, we got one for you this week.
No, you can't win. As we've established, you can't win either way. It's either you're building a lineup that everyone already built early in the week and they're mad that you're blowing up their spot, or it's so off the board that that's just ridiculous. You can't play that. So there's no winning, JF. All right, let's head over to wide receiver. Definitely have some kind of news stuff impacting this slate. Drake London has a Q tag, CeeDee Lamb has a Q tag, AJ Brown. So some stuff like that as we record on Friday afternoon is not fully settled. We did just get news, JM, that Michael Pittman is out this week. I think we definitely need to talk a little bit about Josh Downs. I know he's a guy that's going to project very well here, but what are you seeing overall at wide receiver this week?
Yeah, I mean, right now you'll see it when we get to the player grid, right? I have nothing, like I said, very few stacks, right? Because I've got the Tampa and San Francisco game kind of highlighted, but with more trepidation than other people are going to have in that spot. I have, it's kind of these quarterbacks who I'm like, yeah, like I'll play some Josh Allen, I'll play some Jalen Hurts, I'll play some Justin Herbert, right? But I'm not necessarily playing AJ Brown or Devontae Smith away from Jalen Hurts rosters. I might not even play them on Jalen Hurts rosters. I'm not playing Ladd McConkey away from Justin Herbert rosters because Ladd McConkey, you're betting on him piling up volume. People have to recognize that game he had a couple weeks ago with like the big plays. That's not Ladd McConkey's game. That's going to be a fluky outcome within his profile as a player. What you really want is like the 10-11 target game. And that means Herbert throwing the ball a lot, which means Herbert at 5,200 is a guy that you want to play. So kind of a lot, like not a lot of individual wide receivers that I want to play. I would expect my flex spot to be primarily used up with running backs or potentially 2 tight end builds. And so, which, I've had a lot of that recently. And then you assume like 1 or 2 wide receiver spots are covered with one wide receiver spot is covered with, whatever you're doing at quarterback. One wide receiver spot is covered with whatever value you're needing to find. And so I have a very small wide receiver list, but I'm okay with that. And really nothing that I love. Kind of the 49ers and Garrett Wilson are the only options that I have highlighted as plays that I like would go out of my way to try to play. And then everything else is kind of like this tier 2 bonus of like, yeah, these are better plays on paper than others, but I'm going to be willing to go off the board. I mean, you asked about Downs, right? Downs is, he is much better against man coverage than against zone. The Bills are one of the most zone heavy teams in the NFL. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where you usually don't get tournament winning production against the Bills defense. I mean, for years, Sean McDermott's defense if you just have a rule of don't roster wide receivers against them, you win. On the flip side, this is a week where we might see very few 4x scores at wide receiver. So if Josh Downs, he's overpriced at 6,200, but if he can put up 18, 19 DraftKings points, that actually might be really valuable. So he's on my list. Again, it's like, I don't love it. Now that it looks like, now that Pittman is going to be out, I think AD Mitchell becomes interesting as like a cheap upside type of play. Even Alec Pierce as a cheap with upside type of play. But yeah, I think, again, there's warts on that play, but it's definitely worth considering Josh Downs, some of these indie passing pieces.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I thought Josh Downs was going to be popular as is with Pittman in. He is probably going to get extra steamy with Michael Pittman ruled out. Just to circle back on the Garrett Wilson stuff, just because they are so closely priced, they both had big games last time. Like, how are you thinking about the Garrett Wilson versus Davante Adams? And, if all things are equal, it does sound like you're leaning toward Wilson.
Yeah, definitely. So Davante Adams, let me see if I can pull up these numbers real quickly. So just to highlight this. So 3 years ago, 2021, the last time that Davante and Aaron Rodgers were cooking together. Obviously, Davante was 3 years younger. Aaron Rodgers was 3 years younger. So in that season, Davante Adams had only 5 games where he topped 23.1 DraftKings points. His targets in all of these 5 games, he scored 33 plus. His targets in these games, 18, 16, 8, 13, 14. So why is that? It's because he's seeing short area targets. It's because this is the Aaron Rodgers offense. It's like, we are going to pick you apart in the short and low intermediate areas of the field. And I have this mind meld with Davante Adams, and we're just going to pick you apart that way, right? So the chances of him seeing 14, 16, 18 targets are pretty low with Garrett Wilson sharing the field with him. And so you're kind of hoping he has one of these, he had this 33 plus points on 8 targets because he scored 2 touchdowns and had over 100 yards. So you're kind of hoping for one of those. I definitely like Davante Adams is also on my list, right? I've got like 5 guys as tier 2 bonus plays, and he's one of those 5 guys. But I'm seeing their target shares kind of shaking out similarly, but Garrett Wilson has much greater yak upside. I think he's averaging like 1.8 yards after the catch per reception, and Davante Adams is like 1.05 or something like that. Just very different profiles in terms of what they can do after the catch. And then he's seeing his average target now with Davante Adams in the fold about 3.5 to 4 yards further downfield than Davante Adams' average target. So if the target count shakes out similarly, Garrett Wilson is just the guy with a clearer path to a 30-point game. So I will have exposure to both guys, but Garrett Wilson's the one who stands out between the two.
And it sounds like, just to confirm on it, that those will never really be stacked with Rodgers for you. Those would be more one-off plays.
I don't think I'd say never on anything this week, because again, there's going to be a component for me of, like, I've said it in my DFS interpretations. I'm going to say it in the player grid. Like, this is a unique week where it's going to be important. If you're wondering what I'm thinking, it's going to be important to come back for my Sunday morning update, because Friday night and Saturday this week are going to be my moving off the board time to be like, what could happen? Because Wednesdays and Thursdays are kind of consumed with like understanding what's likeliest to happen on the slate. And this is not necessarily a week where I'm going to build through what's likeliest to happen. And so I'll probably have some additions to the player grid where typically I'm just kind of running through my exposures and saying, hey, not a lot has changed. Here's my exposure line, guys. This is a week where I would expect to add 2-3 pieces that aren't necessarily on there on Friday evening, because I'm willing to go off the board this week to sort of outmaneuver the field.
Yep. And that is a good segue to quickly mention, if you guys aren't signed up over at 1 Week Season, there's all kinds of ways you guys can get up to speed over there and get access to JM's player grid. I got a screenshot here. Obviously, this doesn't populate until later this evening, and then you get the Sunday morning updates. all kinds of good stuff in there. If you want the keys to the castle at 1 week season, code Pete50, promo code Pete50 will get you 50% off your 1 week season and Inner Circle subs. If you just want to test drive it, you can always do a weekly pass. Just the promo code Pete will work on that. Anything on the promo end that people should know about? I don't remember if there's any updates on the Props Insider. Did that close yet?
Yeah, so we were doing 10 days of free access to Props Insider. If you signed up for Inner Circle, the pass expires on November 12th. So if you signed up, you still get the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th of access to Props Insider. So that's still sort of ongoing. We've been really cool. We've had a bunch of people obviously come through Props Insider and get a chance to check it out, make some money off of those NBA bets that have been rolling in, off the political bets that Xanamir was crushing this last week. So what a fun time to be alive.
Crazy. Yes. So there it is. Promo code Pete50 gets you 50% off those 1 week season subs. We'll also get you access to the Behind the Paywall podcasts as well over there. And you can get access to those up here underneath the, where am I looking here for?
Yeah, under NFL, you have the podcast tab. And
yes.
And that'll have, the Slate podcast with Xanamir and Hilo, which is sort of our Slate strategy podcast on Saturday mornings. My Winner Circle podcast, which is midweek sort of training and macro DFS strategy and theory through the lens of the week behind or the week ahead.
Let's touch on a few more wide receivers before we begrudgingly head over to tight end here. Let's talk a few value options. Maybe some interesting names down here. You talked about Quentin Johnston last week. He's sub 5K. Maybe a guy like Noah Brown. Any love for a guy like Sherling Shepard or any of the Bucs wide receivers here? What are you seeing on the value spectrum?
Yeah. So, this is a week, the old Cubs fan thing of having your rosters be all the way to the right or all the way to the left. You open the DraftKings app. Where's your bubble on that line? Is it all the way to the right or all the way to the left? I definitely have potential this week to be all the way to the left because I want to try to be all the way to the right. So guys, I'm not going to play the value plays that are the underneath targets. And I'm hoping that I get 11 points or maybe they trip into a touchdown. I get 14 points, something like that. I want to take swings on the guys who can score from anywhere on the field, because if you get the 20-pointer and no other cheap plays put up more than 10, 11, you're so far ahead of the field, especially if that is a low-owned 20-pointer. So, for me, from the Bucs, it's Raheem Jarrett. I think he's the most interesting one because, again, they're playing through Cade Otton and through the running backs. We're not seeing a ton of volume to the wide receivers. But Raheem Jarrett actually, by far led the team in snaps last week. And, tough matchup against Kansas City. We can kind of wipe that off the board. But Raheem Jarrett, average depth of target this year of 14 or 14.2, something like that. Only 4 targets this year. But then last year, his average depth of target was 17. So, they want to use him downfield. So you have the opportunity with him to hit, 5 targets, but he catches 3 of them for 85 yards and a touchdown. That's what I want to look for from cheap guys. But no, I won't go out of my way to argue against the other Bucs pieces, but I don't think that they're going to be the reason people win tournaments so much as if nothing blows up, those guys could end up on a tournament winning roster, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Any other of, I guess they would be kind of off the board offenses where there might be some value. I'll toss out some other teams like Titans wide receivers, Bears wide receivers. We mentioned the Jags a little bit before. Anything standing out for you there?
Yeah, value is weird, right? Because the DraftKings is pricing things so aggressively now that even, like the Bears, right? Like Keenan Allen, we know his profile as a player this deep in his career. He needs heavy volume. So we're not necessarily looking at him. So you're looking at like Rome Odunze, DJ Moore as who could post a big game on limited volume because we're not going to expect just tons of volume to pile up for these guys. So those guys can hit, but they're also kind of expensive for just guys who, have a low floor but can hit. So this is a week where maybe looking at guys who have a low floor but can hit ends up winning you tournaments because all the popular players are going to be popular because they feel more comfortable, but they might all score in just kind of like a comfortable range without the ceiling. And so, you can take swings on guys like that, but you're taking on a lower floor. It's kind of how I'm seeing it. Parker Washington, I think, is interesting on the Jag side because, again, who are they going to throw the ball to? Is Mac Jones going to really push things outside the numbers to Brian Thomas Jr.? I'd actually prefer this if Gabe Davis comes back. Last week, it was Austin Trammell playing in the slot and Parker Washington picked to be outside, right? Whereas we really want Parker Washington in the slot for kind of maximizing our targets, maximizing our potential to pile up points. So if Gabe Davis comes back, then he kicks to the outside and Parker Washington moves back into the slot where he operates best. So Parker Washington, interesting. Calvin Austin, he hit last week. He's kind of in that Trey Tucker bucket of guys who are on the field all the time, oftentimes won't hit, but when they do hit, they can go for 20. And on weeks when nobody else scores 20, that ends up being really valuable. So he's another guy to consider. And then the Bills. So we don't know how they're going to attack, right? If they're in control, we could see James Cook, but also we could see Josh Allen throw it 28, 30, 32 times. No Keon Coleman. So if Amari Cooper plays, he becomes very interesting this week as a guy who's capable of scoring 30 and who people just aren't going to be on. If he misses, then Mac Hollins is like the only guy they really have on the perimeter. So he's not going to be a focal point in the game plan, but he becomes really interesting value this week if Amari ends up being out.
Let's hit one quick one from the chat here before we move on. Thoughts on Jordan Addison? I know we haven't touched a ton on the Vikings. They're going to be very popular, but Addison might be a piece that flies a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, Addison is currently in my bottom-up build, and so I'll hit on that in the Angles podcast. And yeah, he's one of these guys who, when you're going through on a week like this, where you say, well, the guys who are projectable are still projectable for like lower scores than you really want for them at their price tags, but people aren't going to think outside the box. They're all going to land on these same plays. Okay, who are the players who, yes, they have a lower likelihood. Their likeliest outcome is a bad score, but also they have it within their range of outcomes to jump over everybody. Who are those players? So guys like Rome Odunze, guys like Jordan Addison, kind of priced right next to each other. Guys like Amari Cooper, those are players I really want to think about on this week. And so Addison definitely falls into that bucket where, yeah, by the research on paper, I'm not like, yeah, go out of your way to play Jordan Addison, but it wouldn't shock me if he puts up 25 to 30, things fall into place that way. He ends up being this critical piece on a week where, people are kind of moving towards safer plays that might not have the ceiling.
That makes sense. Yeah. And it's like you said, if you're hunting for these guys that have the big ADOT that can, smash, those can be way better plays than the cheap volume ones. You are just paying like a slight tax on Jordan Addison at this price. A lot of times you can get a little bit more volume, I want to say, at 5,300
right.
than you can expect. But I mean, he's explosive with the ball. So I kind of like it.
And I think this is why it's so critical to take each week as its own puzzle, to recognize what the week provides. Because on a week, if this was last year and we had 4 or 5 really strong options in this price range, it's like, why are you taking on the risk of Jordan Addison, right? Like one of these 4 or 5 strong guys is probably going to post 20 to 25 points. They're going to be 10% owned. So why are you taking on the risk with Jordan Addison where you're probably getting 7, 8 points just to get the same score that other people are going to get, right, from another safer wide receiver? So it's a week like this where there's not a bevy of wide receivers available to us that can put up these types of scores, where we can be like, this is the week to take swings on these guys who, they have lower floors. We can't project them as well, but the ceiling is as high as anybody else on the slate, maybe even higher on some of these guys.
All right, let's move on to tight end. I want to say previously it was you never were excited to talk tight end. And in the past 2 weeks, you're kind of like, I don't mind talking tight end. Where do we fall this week?
Yeah, I mean, I got a small list, but it's a small list of I'll just say this. I think Hunter Henry and Taysom Hill are better value plays than most of the wide receivers priced 4K and below, right? Their chances of scoring 15 to 20 are higher than most of the wide receivers priced at 4K, but probably all of the wide receivers priced at 4K and below. So we played the slate 100 times. Who scores 15 to 20 the most times out of everybody priced 4K and below? Probably Hunter Henry and Taysom Hill. So I think that they're both just interesting value pieces. I'm not throwing them in the bucket of guys I want to go out of my way to play, but when we're talking about where do we save salary this week, those could be the guys who end up opening things up. And then on the higher end, it's really Cade Otton and George Kittle, who both have some interesting components to them, in that George Kittle were, like we said earlier, if Christian McCaffrey comes back, Kittle's usage probably changes. So that's kind of the concern there. And so, and then you could hedge, you could have some Kittle to take advantage of the potential upside, some CMC to take advantage, but there's also that middle ground of maybe CMC plays enough to take away the upside for Kittle, but not enough to really justify his price tag, right? And so it's sort of a weird setup there. But Kittle on a week like this, where where is the ceiling? Well, Kittle certainly has it. And then Otton, the 49ers, we explored this a couple of weeks ago when they played the Chiefs, but the 49ers have been really content to give up underneath passes to tight ends. Cade Otton's average at the target is like 5.8, right? He's just kind of moving a few yards down the field and catching the ball. Well, the 49ers have this sort of bend but don't break style where they're not necessarily getting in your face, trying to force mistakes. And they feel confident that if they force teams to march the field, then those teams are going to make mistakes, or the 49ers are going to make a play and stop the drive. So even though Cade Otton is clearly the focal point, I feel relatively confident that the 49ers aren't going to say, all right, let's just scheme Cade Otton out of this and force the Bucs in a different way. They're the type of defense that's probably going to say, like, sure, if they want to pick up 5-6 yards at a time with Cade Otton, we're okay with that, because when we get in the red zone, we're putting Fred Warner on Cade Otton. He's probably not scoring a touchdown. So that's the thing. Like, this 49ers defense, the rule generally is like, you don't play tight ends against Fred Warner, but the 49ers aren't like sticking Fred Warner on tight ends and trying to take them away, because like he can do so much else between the 20s. It's more in the red zone that his impact is felt. So the chances of a Cade Otton touchdown are much lower than we've had the last couple of weeks, but I think the volume is still going to be there. And on this type of week, that might end up being enough.
Yeah. I mean, just looking at his past 3 games, DraftKings scores is just absolutely outrageous. I mean, he has been such a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of guy, had these spells where he was running like 90% of the routes and not earning a single target, and now just turning into this absolute monster. So life comes at you fast in the NFL. Also, as we've talked about some of these plays, I felt good because I have my Deposit Kingdom video in the can. That's a separate channel where I do underdog kind of sleeper strategy videos each week. The videos have been on fire. Last week, JM, a team I drafted for the video finished in second place in the big battle royale contest. So on stream. And so we got the picks this week. That video will go up in a few hours, and JM has already given his stamp of approval unwittingly on this show by talking about a few plays. So I like hearing that, JM. All right. Let's I don't think there's too much else to hit on at tight end. I want to spend some time for this lineup build. So let's head over to DraftKings for a building block. All right. As always, Deposit Kingdom Weekly League. We got 1,200 entries. I had them fix the payouts at the top 10. So these are smoothed out here. We now got the 2K to first. 10th place is 200. So a nice 10% there, and a gradual pay bump, or I should pay raise up to first place. The only place that you can get access to this tournament is in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. I post it in the announcements section every week. If you guys haven't been in there, the link to the Discord's down below. All kinds of channels in there to talk fantasy, DFS, best ball, sports betting, all of that good stuff. JM, where would you like to kick us off here for our building block?
Are we ready to get ugly? This building block, I'm calling it Tennessee-lite. We've got Arthur Smith, who engineered this. Now, with the Titans, it was Ryan Tannehill. He was not good. But he had Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown. That's different from Najee Harris and George Pickens. But also, like Najee Harris, similar style running back. George Pickens, really good wide receiver. We still haven't seen him fully unlocked with like the right quarterback, the right offense yet. But there's, I would say, a pretty good chance that through the second half of the season, we see at least one blow-up game from this 3-player stack, given like where they're priced at and what type of ceiling they can have. So on a week like this, where I'm willing to move outside of the research and say who could end up putting up the big game, this is a spot that really intrigues me. So I'm going to rattle off a few numbers that I have these in the DFS interpretation. So if you read those already, bear with us here. But I think these are important to highlight. So obviously this is a caveat that Russ has only played 2 games, but Justin Fields averaged 19.7 DraftKings points per game. Russ has averaged 19.8 DraftKings points per game. That's more than Sam Darnold, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, Kirk Cousins. Now, Russ doesn't have the rushing ability that Fields has. So does that come down? Maybe. But also, the whole Arthur Smith offense is run game, deep passing. And Russ is much better at that than Fields, right? So there is a component that Russ brings to the table that Fields was not able to bring to the table. Okay, so Russ's 2 starts. Only the 49ers had topped 25 points against the Jets. 49ers scored 32. Every other team this season had scored 25 or fewer points against the Jets. And Russ and the Steelers scored 37. The Their other game, it was, no team has topped 28 points against the Giants, and the Steelers scored 26 against the Giants. Then we got the Washington defense, where it's like, man, the Washington defense is good, right? Like they've surprised people this year. So these are the teams they played and the scores they've held them to. Okay, so the Giants scored 18, Cardinals. So think about these teams. Cardinals a good offense, but Giants scored 18, Cardinals 14, Deshaun Watson's Browns 13, Panthers 7, Bears 15, Giants 22. Okay, that's where the Washington defense has looked good. Tampa scored 37, Cincy scored 33, Baltimore scored 30. Now those are better offenses than the Steelers, but also we should recognize that the Steelers with Russ have looked good. And so I think that when we're trying to get creative and move off the board, move away from the research, this is a week where, and it's not this specific stack, but I want to plant the thought in people's heads of like, I should be thinking off the board a little bit if I want to win a tournament this week, because there's a pretty good chance that something that doesn't look great on paper, whether it's Drake May or Mac Jones or Russell Wilson, something that doesn't look good on paper has higher potential than normal to win tournaments this week. And so this is what I wanted to highlight in this spot, but also kind of to highlight that idea of we should be thinking outside the box on this particular week.
Yeah. So we got Russell Wilson, and just for the audio listeners, remind them who else is part of this.
We'll go Russell Wilson, Najee Harris, and George Pickens on this one.
Najee Harris. So I never want to hear from the chat again that these lineups are too chalky. I had not given a ton of thought to a Russ Pickens stack this week, but I am intrigued by this game. And we also know how much, Jaden Daniels and these guys can, speed up games, force offenses to play a little bit more aggressive than they would otherwise like. And I like how this kind of plays it both ways. Like they're still going to run the ball. Like that's their identity. That's what they do. But what if they're in this trailing game script? What if they have to keep pace? So I like this. And where do we go from here? Because this leaves us with about 5,100 salary. It's, I would say, middle of the road as far as salary. We've spent a little bit, but we got some room to work with here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got about 6,000 per player, generally speaking. That's about where we're still at here. So, so let's first talk about bringbacks and if you need one. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but Jaden Daniels, Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, Terry McLaurin, Noah Brown, Zach Ertz. All of those players have failed to go for 4x their week 10 salary in any game at any point this season. So I don't think you need a bringback. I also, though, want to highlight that this is a week in which I'm like, maybe you're not getting 4x from a lot of the players on your roster. And so somebody like Noah Brown certainly works really well as a bringback on this roster, because you're basically saying, and then that's what I like about this is the Steelers have a really good defense, but Washington's probably going to do somewhat well against them. And even if Russ doesn't throw it 35 times, he still probably throws it 30 with some moon balls where you're trying to hit big plays. And so the ceiling is absolutely there. So we could bring it back with Noah Brown. And then we can also, that's kind of one of these things where if we need to move off of him, I'm totally fine doing that, because I'm not isolating him and highlighting him as the guy I'm going out of my way to play. It's more like, oh, here's a way to save salary that really fits in with what we're doing. You probably get 9 to 11 points from Noah Brown, but you got this outside shot at like 15, 16 point game.
Yeah. And then I guess, how do you think, I guess sometimes I get tripped up with, and I've gotten better about not forcing bringbacks, but sometimes I'm like, what are the scenarios where Noah Brown wins me a tournament where Jaden Daniels is also not the optimal quarterback? Because it probably means Noah Brown's hitting for a long touchdown if that's the case.
Well, yeah. And so I tend to ask that question in the reverse of salary. So like, what are the scenarios where Justin Jefferson posts a tournament winning score at 8,800 and Sam Darnold at 6,200 is not the quarterback you wanted to have? What are the chances that George Pickens at 6,800 is posting a tournament like 30 plus points and Russell Wilson at 5,900 is not the quarterback you needed to have? A guy like Noah Brown, it's pretty easy for Noah Brown to hit 18, 20, 22 DraftKings points, be a serious separator at that price tag, and that to not at all mean that Jaden Daniels at his price tag is a guy that you needed to have this week. So definitely, like when we flip it around this way, this is one that I'm more comfortable with is going this direction. We know Noah Brown can hit for big plays too. So, he becomes an interesting play on this slate.
Let's, you want to put a defense in to see where that leaves us right now? Do you got any defensive plays?
Yeah. So this is like most of the slate, this is a week where like I have some defenses that stand out, but I'm also more willing than normal to move off the board. I think we can throw the Bears on right now, just as kind of one of the safer ways to go. Obviously Drake May has revitalized this Patriots offense, but he's still going to take sacks. He's still probably going to turn the ball over. And, Bears still a really good defense this game on the road. So at 3K, I think we're getting good value here, and we're doing something differently enough from the field that we don't necessarily need to worry about ownership on our defense special team. So even if the Bears come in popular, that's okay with us.
Yeah, so this leaves us about 6K remaining. We got a running back, wide receiver, tight end, and flex. Maybe talk tight end here, right? Because we're not going to be correlating anything with Russ. We're not doing anything with Ertz here in this game. So what tight end do we go with? One of those value plays you like?
Yeah, so we can go ahead and throw Taysom Hill on this one. And basically the story is just that they're going to continue like designing their offense so that he's a critical part of the game plan, right? He had, 5 carries and 5 targets last week. And so just a guy who's 4K and is going to be somebody that they're going to be isolating and saying, all right, let's play some of this game through him, is a guy that we can kind of lean on. And we know that the range of outcomes is broad, but the ceiling is really high. And the range of outcomes on most tight ends is broad. So I think he's a sharp way to save salary this week. I also want to throw in Saquon Barkley on this roster because I would like to prioritize him over wide receiver where I don't have as much confidence. And even throwing, because of the fact that we don't have as much confidence at wide receiver, I think we'll be able to get to Garrett Wilson on this roster and kind of get like, not that Saquon and this kind of goes with everything we've been saying, not that Saquon and Garrett Wilson would be my highest confidence plays in a typical week, but on this particular week, they're kind of my highest confidence plays at those two positions. So in other words, like the chance of them failing are higher than my typical high confidence play, but they're still, in the context of this slate, my highest confidence play. So like to be able to get those guys on there if we can. And then that gives us actually kind of some flexibility here because we can go down to like a Parker Washington. We could throw Calvin Austin on here and as like pull in one more piece from this passing attack and just say, well, he's so cheap that, you kind of overstack. You could throw Freiermuth on here with the same type of thinking, or I don't know anything else that you're seeing down low. But down here, it's kind of like dart throws, right? And so, this is a spot where I don't mind just kind of grabbing something. Or we could even go all the way down to Raheem Jarrett and then spend more at defense, where most people won't be doing that, just to kind of do something differently than the field.
Yeah, or you could go down at defense too. Like if you had a stomach for like the Patriots defense, that would give you 500 more, get you into the 4,800 range. I don't know if that gets us.
Doesn't really do much for us, does it?
Yeah, it's kind of a gross range. But yeah, little choose your own adventure here to round out this lineup. And I was also kind of exploring that concept you mentioned too of like Taysom Hill and Hunter Henry projecting better than a lot of the other guys. Like there's probably some avenues here where if you went Hunter Henry, and maybe I know Noah Brown is part of this lineup, but if you did that, I guess that's still in that 4,700 range. So it's not great, but there's some ways you could play double tight end with those two values and see how that works out as well.
Yeah. And this is a week where, I mean, the great thing about Noah Brown is you're not sacrificing that much in terms of ceiling. Like you're still getting a guy capable. Noah Brown's capable of going for 25 DraftKings points on 6 targets, right? So you're still taking a guy who has potential to be like a difference maker on the slate. He fits in with the roster that you're building. I always, you talk about your hurdle of like not having a bring back. One of my hurdles is playing this flex player with the defense, which isn't as it's not as fishy as it feels, but it always feels like a fish move. It's always like, do I really want to do this? But in the context of this roster, in the context of this slate, it's actually perfectly fine way to build this roster. And so, and I've had in my practice builds quite a few Taysom, Hunter Henry rosters just to like throw those two in and see what I can do with the rest of my roster. Not necessarily saying that's what I'm going to lock in this week, but it's 2 value plays that I like, and then you get a feel for what else is available in the slate.
Good stuff there. As always, this is meant to be an idea generating exercise, get the juices flowing. And I think valuable too, to just get a lay of the land and why a contrarian angle like this is more viable on a more limited slate. As far as the options, there's slates where there would be a ton of awesome plays where you probably wouldn't entertain this because you just don't have to, but the path to first place might require some creative thinking in week 10. Jam, let people know. I know last week you mentioned your show with Squirrel Patrol that found a new home at OWS. Let the people know the other kind of content things that they can hit if they want to pop around with you on Friday and Saturday for more DFS goods.
Yeah, busy day for me today. I have the player grid getting wrapped up. You'll find that in the scroll. I have the Angles podcast and my podcast is Solo Ship with Squirrel Patrol. You can find both of those on the OWS YouTube channel or OWS 1 week season podcast feed. Just search 1 week season. And then as always, I will be carving out time to listen to Searching for Ceiling tomorrow, listen to the Slate tomorrow, 2 of my must listens every week. So Searching for Ceiling's free on the 1 Week Season podcast feed on the YouTube channel. The Slate is available to Inner Circle members. And then, like I said, my Sunday morning update, I think this week is probably going to be somewhat critical. I mean, I'm just guessing, but I would imagine that, like, because I want to go off the board, and I think I've done a good job explaining why I'll be looking to go off the board this week, but because I'll be comfortable going off the board, like I have to get creative on Friday night, on Saturday, and be like, what else could I do on this week? Because that's kind of the approach that I'll probably end up taking in tournaments. And then I'll probably like not totally watch the games on Sunday, because it's like my roster is going to either do really well or really poorly, because I'm going to be doing something really different than the field. And if the field is clumped up together, I'm either jumping over the field or I'm not. And so live and let live on Sunday and just see what happens.
Good stuff there. As we mentioned earlier, if you guys want access to JM's final thoughts on Sunday mornings, including his initial thoughts in the player grid, you can get access to all of that with an OWS Inner Circle subscription, and you can get 50% off that rest of season sub. That'll, get you, what are we, week 10? We'll be doing this through week 18, 8 more weeks here.
Plus the playoffs.
Plus the playoffs. So promo code Pete50, take advantage of that massive 50% discount, Pete50 over there at 1 Week Season. As for me, here in 20 minutes, I'm hopping on with Nez. No John this week. He's out touching grass, but Nez and I are going to run a little 2-man pick and roll going through the underdog slate. We will do our favorite value plays, scroll down options, small field and large field strategy, and of course, build some pick'em entries. And then after that, my video dropping on the Deposit Kingdom channel, separate channel. Make sure you guys are subscribed to that. And I will mention, I don't even think I've mentioned this anywhere. I'm doing a giveaway this week on the Deposit Kingdom channel. It's going to be a $700 giveaway that I'm going to do. Feeling generous after my big week. So you're going to need to be subscribed to that channel. Make sure you're over there, and the details on how you can enter into that giveaway will be in that video. All right. Appreciate everyone hanging out in the chat. Appreciate Jmtowin, as we like to say around here. Good luck, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.